White father fled from black twins at birth. Years later, he panics upon seeing them at his own company. My beautiful, respected, and endlessly loved family, welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Because of your unshakable love, your loyalty, and the faith you've placed in me, we have grown into a family of 24,000 hearts beating together. I don't have words big enough to thank you, but please know I feel your love in every moment. And now, with open arms, I welcome all the new souls who joined us in the last few days. If this is your first time here, I ask only one thing: don't leave in the beginning. Watch the story till the very end. Let the emotions speak to you. Let the journey unfold. Give me your trust just once, and to my loyal family, please, share in the comments how deeply satisfied you've been. Let our new members feel your warmth, your joy, your truth. We're now reaching for 100,000, and every like, every comment, every heart that stays with me brings us one step closer. If you still feel this bond, if you're still holding my hand through this journey, then whisper it with pride. I am here. That one line means everything to me, and now my prayer for you, written from a place of purest love. May your soul find peace in a world that rushes. May you be surrounded by people who lift you higher. May your dreams find wings and your burdens find rest. May each sunrise remind you how precious you are, and may you never, ever doubt how deeply you are loved. This isn't a channel. This is a home, and I'm nothing without you. Say it now, if you feel it too. I am here. The grandfather clock in George Williams' penthouse office struck 2 a.m., its deep chimes echoing through the silence like a funeral bell. 45 floors above Chicago's glittering skyline, the city's most successful marketing mogul sat hunched over his mahogany desk, surrounded by the trappings of a billion-dollar empire that felt as hollow as his chest. George's trembling fingers traced the edges of a faded ultrasound photo, the only physical evidence of the family he had destroyed decades ago. In the grainy black-and-white image, two tiny forms floated in Rita's womb, like promises he had been too cowardly to keep. Baby A and Baby B, the technician had called them. Marcus and Maya. Rita had whispered through tears of joy that George now knew were the last happy tears she would shed because of him. God, what have I done? He whispered to the empty office, his voice cracking like brittle glass. The words hung in the air, unanswered, just like every prayer he had uttered for forgiveness over the past 2 decades. The ultrasound was tucked inside a leather portfolio that contained every piece of evidence of his greatest failure. Hospital. Bracelets from the day the twins were born, the day he had held them for exactly 17 minutes before terror consumed him, and he fled like the coward he was. Birth certificates bearing his name as father, mocking him with the legal responsibility he had abandoned, and dozens of letters from Rita, each one more desperate than the last, begging him to come home, promising to love him forever, pleading for their children who cried for a daddy who would never return. He had stopped reading them after the first year. He had stopped answering her calls after the first month. He had stopped being a man the moment he walked out of that hospital, leaving Rita to raise their children alone while he convinced himself she was better off without him. The irony wasn't lost on him that Williams and Associates had become the most successful, family-focused marketing firm in the country. He had built his fortune helping other companies sell the dream of perfect families while living like a ghost in his own life. Every Father's Day campaign was torture. Every commercial about coming home was a knife to his heart. Every billboard showing happy families was a reminder of what he had thrown away. Tonight was particularly brutal. It was Marcus and Maya's birthday, their 22nd, a milestone he had no right to celebrate but couldn't ignore. As he did every year, George had made anonymous donations to children's charities, a pathetic attempt to balance the cosmic scales he had tipped towards suffering. The checks were always for exactly the amount he calculated he should have spent on birthday parties, Christmas presents, school supplies, and college tuition. As if money could buy absolution for abandonment. The whiskey glass sat empty beside him, drained hours ago when the pain became too sharp to bear sober. But alcohol couldn't numb what he had done to Rita. Beautiful, brilliant Rita Dominic, who had loved him with a ferocity that terrified him. She had been 23 when she got pregnant, still in graduate school, but she had looked at those ultrasound images with such wonder and joy that it made George's heart soar and shatter simultaneously. "We're going to be a family," she had whispered, pressing the ultrasound photos to her chest. "A real family, George. Can you believe it?" He had believed it for exactly 7 months and 13 days. Until the moment the twins were placed in his arms, small and perfect and completely dependent on him, and panic had seized his throat like a vice. What did he know about being a father? His own father had been absent and critical, showing affection only through disappointed sighs and impossible expectations. George's mother had spent his childhood medicating her unhappiness with prescription pills and country club gossip. They had money but no warmth, prestige but no love. "You're not ready for this," his mother had said when he'd told her about the pregnancy. "That girl trapped you. You'll ruin those children just like your father ruined you." Those words had echoed in his head as he held Marcus and Maya, their tiny fingers wrapped around his thumbs. What if she was right? What if he destroyed them with his inadequacy? What if he failed them the way his father had failed him? The love he felt for them was so overwhelming, it felt dangerous, like carrying nitroglycerin in his chest. One wrong move and everything would explode. So he had made the most wrong move of all. He had left. George pushed back from his desk and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Rita was probably sleeping peacefully, having built a beautiful life without him. She had finished her MBA, started her own consulting firm, raised 2 incredible children who probably didn't even know his name. He hoped she hated him. It would be easier than knowing she might have spent even a moment missing the man who had destroyed her trust in love. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant, Sarah. "Don't forget, orientation meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. for the new creative director and graduate interns. The candidates are exceptional. This could be transformative for the company." Transformative. George almost laughed at the word. Nothing could transform him. He was fundamentally broken, genetically designed to hurt the people he loved most. That's why he had never married, never had another serious relationship, never even considered having more children. He was a weapon of mass emotional destruction, disguised as a successful businessman. The city lights blurred as tears filled his eyes. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass and closed his eyes, letting himself remember Rita's voice one more time. The way she used to whisper his name like a prayer. The way she laughed at his terrible jokes. The way she had looked at him when she told him she was pregnant. Like he was her whole world. "I would have loved you forever," she had sobbed. The last time he saw her, holding the twins in the hospital room. "We could have been everything together. Why isn't that enough? Why aren't we enough?" He had no answer then. He had no answer now, just the crushing weight of regret that had shaped every decision for 22 years. Every business move, every investment, every charitable donation was an attempt to prove he was worthy of something. He had already lost. He was trying to earn forgiveness from people who probably didn't even remember his name. George walked back to his desk and carefully placed the ultrasound photo back in the portfolio. Tomorrow would bring another day of pretending to be a functioning human being, another day of building an empire on the foundation of his greatest shame, another day of wondering if Rita ever thought about him, if the twins ever asked about their father, if love could survive such complete betrayal. The leather portfolio felt heavier than it should as he locked it back in his safe. Inside were newspaper clippings he had collected over the years, Rita's business achievements, awards she had won, photos from charity events where she looked radiant and successful. He had followed her career from afar like a stalker, proud of her accomplishments, while knowing he had no right to that pride. There were no photos of Marcus and Maya, though he had searched for them. Rita had protected their privacy fiercely, keeping them out of the spotlight that followed her professional success. Sometimes George wondered if she had told them about him at all, or if she had created some comforting fiction about a father who had died heroically rather than one who had simply chosen to disappear. The thought of his children believing he was dead was almost comforting. Death was noble, tragic, forgivable. Abandonment was none of those things. George poured another whiskey, his third of the night, and walked back to the windows. The city stretched out below him like a circuit board of lights and lives, millions of people living and loving and making the kinds of choices he had been too weak to make. Out there were fathers tucking their children into bed, mothers kissing scraped knees, families sitting around dinner tables, sharing the sacred, ordinary moments that George had forfeited. "Happy birthday, Marcus and Maya," he whispered to his reflection in the glass. "I hope you never know how much your father loves you. I hope you never know what a coward he is." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Love without action was just emotional masturbation, and George had been masturbating his feelings for 22 years, while Rita did the actual work of raising their children. She had been mother and father, provider and nurturer, disciplinarian and comforter. She had been everything while he had been nothing. The clock struck 3 a.m., marking another hour closer to a tomorrow that George feared would be exactly like today, empty, hollow, and haunted by the ghosts of the family he had thrown away. He finished his whiskey and prepared to go to his bedroom, to lie awake until dawn, thinking about what might have been. But tomorrow would not be like today. Tomorrow, fate would drag him face to face with his greatest love and deepest regret. Tomorrow, Rita Domnich would walk back into his life, bringing with her the children he had abandoned and a heart full of carefully planned vengeance. Tomorrow, George Williams would finally face the consequences of the worst decision he had ever made. Outside, Chicago slept peacefully, unaware that one of its most successful citizens was slowly dying from a broken heart that would never heal. Chapter 2. The Queen's Arrival. The morning of reckoning arrived with deceptive normalcy. George sat in his corner office, trying to focus on quarterly reports while his hands trembled imperceptibly around his coffee cup. The nightmare from the previous evening clung to him, like smoke, Rita's voice calling his name, the twins reaching for him with tiny hands, the crushing weight of 22 years of abandonment. "Mr. Williams?" Sarah's voice crackled through the intercom. "The orientation meeting is starting in conference room A. The new creative director and interns are ready for your welcome speech." George straightened his tie and checked his reflection. In the window, the successful businessman stared back, silver at his temples now, lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights, but still the face Rita had once traced with loving fingers. He wondered if she would recognize the boy she had loved in the man he had become. "On my way," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest. The executive hallway felt longer than usual as George walked toward conference room A. His footsteps echoed off marble floors that had witnessed countless business triumphs, but never anything as significant as what was about to unfold. Through the glass walls, he could see Sarah arranging materials, his senior staff taking their seats, and 3 figures with their backs to him. 1 woman and 2 younger people who made his breath catch in his throat. There was something familiar about the way the woman held herself. The graceful line of her shoulders, the way she gestured with her hands as she spoke quietly to her companions. George's heart began to pound with a rhythm that felt dangerous, like warning drums before a battle. He reached for the conference room door, his hand freezing on the handle as the woman turned around. Time stopped. The universe held its breath. 22 years collapsed into a single, devastating moment. Rita Dominic stood before him like a vision conjured from his deepest dreams and darkest nightmares. She was more beautiful than memory had dared preserve. Success had refined her features into something regal and untouchable. Her hair was shorter now, framing her face in sophisticated waves that spoke of expensive salons and careful styling. She wore a charcoal business suit that looked like armor, every line perfectly tailored to announce her power and success. But it was her eyes that destroyed him. Those same dark eyes that had looked at him with infinite love now burned with something far more dangerous: intelligence, fury, and the cold calculation of a woman who had spent years planning this moment. Behind her stood two young people who made George's knees buckle: Marcus and Maya, his children. The babies he had held for 17 minutes before running like a coward were now adults, and they were magnificent. Marcus had grown into Rita's gentle strength wrapped around George's stubborn jawline. He was tall and lean, with the kind of quiet confidence that made people instinctively trust him. He carried his intelligence like his mother did, as a tool, not a weapon. And when he moved, George saw echoes of his own gestures from decades past. Maya was art in human form, with George's piercing green eyes set in Rita's graceful features. She moved like a dancer, every gesture deliberate and beautiful. And when she smiled at something Marcus whispered, George's heart shattered completely. She was creativity personified, the kind of person who saw beauty where others saw problems. They were perfect. They were everything George had dreamed they would become, and they were strangers to him. "Good morning, George." Rita's voice cut through his stunned silence like a blade. It was the same voice that had whispered love declarations and marriage plans, but now it carried the weight of 22 years of raising children alone. "I'd like you to meet our new graduate interns." The word "our" hung in the air like a loaded gun. Everyone in the room could feel the electricity crackling between George and Rita, but only the two of them understood its source. "This is Marcus Williams Dominic," Rita continued, her voice never wavering. "He's completing his MBA with a focus on sustainable business practices. And this is Maya Williams Dominic, finishing her master's in creative design and communications. Williams Dominic." They had kept his name. After everything he had done, Rita had given their children his name like a gift he didn't deserve. The hyphenation was like a bridge between two worlds, his failure and her strength. "Mr. Williams." Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand, with the same directness George remembered having at that age. "It's an honor to meet you. Your company's reputation for ethical marketing is impressive." George stared at the hand offered to him, his son's hand, and felt reality tilt sideways. This was Marcus, his boy. The tiny infant who had gripped his thumb with surprising strength was now a man, offering professional courtesy to the father, who had abandoned him. "The honor is mine," George managed, his voice barely a whisper. When their hands touched, electricity shot up his arm. Marcus had his grip, firm and confident, but Rita's warmth. The contact lasted exactly 3 seconds, but George memorized every detail. The callus on Marcus's palm from what looked like rock climbing, the simple watch that spoke of practical choices, the way his eyes assessed George with intelligence that was both familiar and foreign. "And you must be Maya," George said, turning to his daughter. She was studying him with artist's eyes, seeing things others missed, cataloguing details for later examination. When she smiled politely and shook his hand, George nearly broke down. Her grip was gentle but sure, like her mother's, and her eyes held depths that spoke of a creative soul and a sensitive heart. "Mr. Williams," Maya said simply. Her voice was musical, carrying hints of Rita's cadence, but with its own unique melody. Thank you for this opportunity. Please, George said, fighting to keep his voice steady. Call me George. I don't think so, Rita interjected smoothly. Mr. Williams maintains appropriate boundaries between management and staff. Isn't that right, George? The way she said his name was like a slap wrapped in silk. Everyone else heard professional courtesy. George heard 22 years of fury carefully controlled. Rita was in complete command of this moment, and he was drowning. Of course, he agreed, because what else could he say? That these weren't just any interns. That Marcus and Maya were his children, the greatest love and deepest regret of his life? That seeing them was like being resurrected and murdered simultaneously? Excellent, Rita said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. I'm sure you're eager to hear about our qualifications. Marcus graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, with his undergraduate degree in business administration. He's been working with inner-city youth programs for the past 3 years, teaching financial literacy and entrepreneurship. Very passionate about giving back to communities that have been overlooked. Of course he was. George felt pride and pain. War in his chest. Marcus was everything good about both his parents, with none of George's cowardice. And Maya, Rita continued, her voice softening with maternal pride, completed her undergraduate degree in fine arts at the Art Institute of Chicago. She's been featured in several local galleries, and her thesis project on healing through visual narrative won the Dean's Award. She's particularly interested in how art can tell stories of resilience and hope. George looked at Maya again, seeing new layers. An artist who painted hope, a woman who found beauty in healing, his daughter who had turned whatever pain his abandonment caused into something meaningful and beautiful. They sound exceptional, George said, meaning every word. I'm sure they'll be valuable additions to our team. Oh, they will be, Rita said. And there was something in her tone that made the hair on George's neck stand up. In fact, I have some very specific ideas about how to maximize their potential here. We should schedule a private meeting to discuss strategy. The rest of the orientation passed in a blur of presentations and introductions. George watched his children interact with other staff members, seeing flashes of personality that made his heart ache. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about the company's diversity initiatives. Maya sketched in a notebook while listening, her hand moving in flowing lines that probably captured more truth than the words being spoken. Rita dominated every conversation she entered, commanding respect with the kind of effortless authority that came from years of fighting for everything she had achieved. She was brilliant. George had always known that. But now her intelligence was weaponized, honed by 2 decades of single motherhood into something formidable and dangerous. When she laughed at something a colleague said. George remembered that laugh echoing through his apartment when they were young and in love. When she gestured to emphasize a point, he remembered those same hands caressing his face. When she looked at Marcus and Maya with fierce maternal pride, he remembered her looking at ultrasound photos with wonder and joy. But mostly, George watched. Rita. She was magnificent in her controlled fury, every gesture calculated, every word chosen for maximum impact. She had spent 2 years planning this moment, he realized. This wasn't coincidence. It was carefully orchestrated revenge. The twins seemed oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around them. They were poised and professional, clearly raised to excellence by a mother who had refused to let her circumstances define her children's futures. They treated George with polite respect, unaware that they were shaking hands with the man who had abandoned them before they could even focus their eyes. When the meeting ended, George's staff filtered out, chatting with the new interns and welcoming them warmly. Marcus and Maya were swept away in conversations about projects and timelines, leaving George and Rita alone in the conference room for the first time in 22 years. The silence stretched between them like a chasm filled with all the words they had never said, all the apologies that came too late, all the love that had been twisted into something darker by time and abandonment. "Hello, Rita," George finally whispered, his voice breaking on her name. Rita's professional mask slipped for just a moment, and George saw the girl he had loved, vulnerable, beautiful, still somewhere beneath the armor of success and motherhood. But then the mask snapped back into place, and when she spoke, her voice was ice and steel. "Hello, George. Meet your children, the ones you decided weren't worth staying for." The words hit him like physical blows. Around them, the business world continued its normal rhythm. But in this glass-walled conference room, 22 years of consequences were finally coming home to roost. George Williams was about to discover what it meant to face the mother of the children he had abandoned. And Rita Dominic was about to show him exactly how powerful a woman's love could be when it was betrayed, refined by time and struggle into something far more dangerous than the girl he had left crying in a hospital bed. The Queen had arrived on the battlefield, and the war for George Williams' soul was about to begin. Chapter 3. Mother's Rage Unleashed. Rita waited exactly 37 minutes after the orientation meeting ended before making her move. She knew George would retreat to his corner office like a wounded animal seeking its den. She knew he would sit behind his mahogany desk, trying to process what had just unfolded, struggling to reconcile the successful businessman he had become with the coward who had abandoned his family. She also knew that this confrontation had been 22 years in the making, and she was going to savor every second of his destruction. "Sarah," Rita said to George's assistant with the smile that had charmed clients and intimidated competitors for years, "I need to speak with Mr. Williams about the integration of our new initiatives. Is he available?" "Of course, Ms. Dominic." "He's expecting you." "No," Rita thought as she walked toward George's office. He wasn't expecting this. He was expecting the broken girl he had left crying in a hospital bed. He was expecting someone he could charm or intimidate or dismiss with money and power. He wasn't expecting the woman she had forged herself into through 2 decades of single motherhood, professional achievement, and carefully cultivated rage. George's office was exactly what she had expected, a monument to success built on the foundation of abandonment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city like a king surveying his kingdom. The furniture was expensive and masculine, designed to intimidate and impress. Awards lined the walls, testament to his professional achievements. But Rita noticed there were no personal photos, no family pictures, no evidence of a life beyond business. Good. He had been as empty as she had been full. George stood when she entered, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. 22 years had aged. Him, carved lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hollow victories. He was still handsome, the same strong jaw and intelligent eyes that had made her fall in love at 21. But now those features were haunted by the ghost of the man he could have been. "Rita," he breathed, her name coming out like a prayer. "You look incredible." "Do I?" Rita closed the door behind her with deliberate care, the click of the lock echoing like the sound of a trap being set. "That's what 22 years of raising your children alone will do to a woman. It either destroys you or it makes you unstoppable. Guess which one I chose." She moved into the room like a predator circling wounded prey, taking in every detail. The expensive suit that couldn't hide his hunched shoulders, the way his hands gripped the edge of his desk like an anchor. The safe behind his desk that probably contained the only honest things in this temple to his success. "Rita, I know." Her voice cracked like a whip, stopping his words cold. "You don't get to speak yet. You don't get to explain or apologize, or make this about your pain. You lost that right when you walked out of Northwestern Memorial Hospital on March 15th, 2003 at 3:47 in the afternoon. George's face went white. She remembered the exact time. Of course she did. A mother never forgets the moment her children's father chooses to abandon them. For over 2 decades, Rita continued, her voice building like a storm, I have waited for this moment. More than 20 years of birthdays you missed, Christmas mornings you ignored, first steps you didn't see, graduations you weren't at. Years upon years of being both mother and father to 2 incredible children who deserved better than a coward for a father. She moved closer, watching him flinch with each word. Good. He should flinch. He should feel every syllable like a physical blow. Do you want to know what the hardest part was, George? Not the sleepless nights, or the financial struggles, or the exhaustion that made me feel like I was drowning. No, the hardest part was explaining to 2 beautiful babies why their daddy didn't love them enough to stay. Rita, please, please. The word exploded out of her like a gunshot, and George actually stepped backward. Did you think about please when you left me alone in that hospital room? Did you consider please when you ignored my phone calls? When you threw away my letters? When you chose to let your children grow up believing their father was dead, rather than face the truth that he was just too much of a coward to love them? Tears were streaming down her face now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of 22 years of suppressed fury finally finding its target. I called you every day for 2 years, George. Every single day. Do you know what it's like to dial a number with shaking hands while your babies are crying in the background, praying that today will be the day their father remembers he has a heart? Do you know what it feels like to leave voicemail after voicemail, begging the man you love to come home to his family? George was openly weeping now, his successful businessman facade crumbling like a house of cards. Rita, I was terrified. I didn't know how to be a father. You thought what? That abandoning us was better than trying? That we'd be better off without you? Rita laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Well, congratulations, George. You were right about one thing. We were better off without you. Because your absence taught me that I was stronger than I ever imagined. It taught me that I could be everything my children needed, even when it felt impossible. She was close, enough now to see the gold flecks in his green eyes, the same eyes Maya had inherited, the same eyes that had looked at her with love once upon a time, before fear turned him into a stranger. You want to know what I called myself every night for the first 2 years, George? Every night when I was so exhausted I could barely stand, when the twins were teething and screaming and I hadn't slept in 3 days, when the bills were piling up and I was working 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. George nodded, afraid to speak, afraid to breathe. Mother! The word came out like a battle cry, fierce and proud and filled with 22 years of sacrificial love. I called myself mother, single mother, because their father was too much of a coward to help me carry the most beautiful burden in the world. Rita's hand moved before her conscious mind made the decision. All those years of rage, of sleepless nights, of being both parents to 2 children who deserved everything, of building an empire while her heart was broken, all of it condensed into one moment of pure, righteous fury. Her palm connected with George's cheek with a sound like thunder, the slap echoing through his office like the crack of Judgment Day. The force of it spun his head to the side and left a perfect red handprint on his face, a brand that marked him as what he was, a man who had abandoned his family. That's for every Mother's Day I spent alone. Rita's voice was raw now, stripped of all pretense and professionalism. Every night they cried for a father who chose to be dead to them. Every time I had to be strong enough for 3 people because one of us was too weak to even try. George staggered backward, his hand pressed to his burning cheek, tears streaming down his face. The slap had been more than physical. It was 22 years of consequences, delivered in a single devastating moment. Every birthday cake I bought alone, Rita continued, her voice breaking with the weight of memory. Every school play where other children had both parents cheering and mine had just me. Every soccer game, every art show, every moment when they looked into the crowd, hoping to see their father, and found only empty space. She was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that came from the deepest places of her heart. Do you know what Maya asked me when she was 7 years old? She wanted to know if she had done something wrong, if that's why Daddy went to heaven without saying goodbye. And Marcus, God, Marcus, he used to save half his Halloween candy just in case Daddy comes back. Until he was 12, George. 12! George fell to his knees, the weight of her words and his own guilt finally crushing him completely. He looked up at Rita through tears and saw not the girl he had loved, but the magnificent woman she had become in spite of his abandonment. "I would have loved you forever," Rita whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying the weight of absolute truth. "We were going to be a family, George, a real family. I would have loved you through every fear, every doubt, every moment of uncertainty. But you didn't trust me enough to try. You didn't trust our love enough to fight for it." She knelt down so they were eye to eye, this broken man and the woman he had forged through fire and abandonment. "But here's what you're going to learn, George Williams. Here's what your cowardice created. I became the mother I needed to be because I had no choice. I became successful because my children deserved security. I became strong because they needed someone who would never, ever abandon them the way their father did." Rita stood up, smoothing her skirt, her professional composure, returning like armor being reassembled. "And now I'm here," she said, her voice steady again but carrying an undertone of steel that made George's blood run cold. "I'm here with the children you threw away, and we're going to work in your company, in your space, reminding you every single day of what you lost. Not because I want you back. That woman died in a hospital room 22 years ago. But because I want you to see what we became without you. I want you to understand exactly what your fear cost all of us." George looked up at her from his knees, this queen among women who had risen from the ashes of his abandonment to become something magnificent and terrible. "Why?" he whispered. "Why now? Why this?" Rita's smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. "Because, George, after 22 years of being everything to my children, I decided it was time for their father to see exactly what he chose to walk away from. Consider this your education in consequences." She turned to leave, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown to Judgment Day. "Rita, wait." She paused at the door but didn't turn around. "Don't mistake this for forgiveness, George. This is justice. And justice is a dish best served cold. Though I've had 22 years to let it freeze." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving George alone on his knees in his temple to success, his cheek still burning from the righteous fury of the woman he had loved and lost through his own cowardice. Outside his office, Rita leaned against the wall and took a shaking breath. 22 years of rage had been released in one devastating confrontation, and she felt both emptied and empowered. The war had begun, and George Williams was about to discover that hell hath no fury like a mother's love betrayed. Chapter 4. The Children of Abandonment. For 3 days after Rita's devastating confrontation, George moved through his own company like a ghost, haunting the scene of his greatest crime. His cheek had stopped burning, but the phantom pain of her slap lingered, like a brand on his soul. Every mirror reflection showed him the truth. He was a man who had abandoned his family, and now that family was working floors below him, living and breathing reminders of his cowardice. He couldn't help himself, despite Rita's warning to stay. Away, despite knowing he had forfeited any right to know them, George found himself drawn to Marcus and Maya like a dying man drawn to water. He studied the staff directory obsessively, memorizing their schedules, their project assignments, their lunch breaks. He became a student of his own children, learning them from a distance, like a scholar studying artifacts from a civilization he had helped destroy. Marcus worked in the strategy department on the 32nd floor. George discovered this by carefully timing his daily rounds, his heart hammering as he caught glimpses of his son through glass conference room walls. Marcus moved through the office with quiet confidence, the kind of natural leadership that couldn't be taught. When he spoke in meetings, people listened. When he smiled, which was often, it transformed his entire face into something radiant and warm. "He's brilliant," George overheard Linda Morrison, the strategy director, telling her assistant. "Marcus has this incredible ability to see the human impact of business decisions. He asked me yesterday how our new campaign would affect the families in the communities we're targeting. Not just the demographics or the market penetration, the actual families. When's the last time you heard a 22-year-old ask that question?" George pressed himself against the wall outside Linda's office, drinking in every word about his son like a starving man savoring breadcrumbs. "And he's so respectful," Linda continued. "He calls everyone sir and ma'am until they insist otherwise. His mother raised him right." His mother, Rita, who had been both mother and father while George was building his empire of guilt. Marcus's respectfulness wasn't genetics. It was Rita's fierce dedication to raising children who honored the world around them, even when the world hadn't honored them with a present father. George watched Marcus through the conference room glass, seeing his own stubborn jawline and analytical mind wrapped in Rita's warmth and strength. When Marcus presented his ideas, he gestured with the same hands George saw in the mirror every morning. But those hands had been shaped by Rita's love and guidance. They were hands that had never known their father's touch, but had been taught to create rather than destroy. During lunch breaks, Marcus often ate in the company cafeteria with other interns, but George noticed he always made sure to include anyone sitting alone. When an older janitor took his break in the corner, Marcus would walk over and strike up conversations about the man's family, his weekend plans, his thoughts on the Cubs' chances this season. It was the kind of instinctive kindness that came from being raised by someone who understood what exclusion felt like. My son would have been like that, George thought, then caught himself. Marcus was his son, but George had never been his father. Maya worked in the creative department on the 34th floor, and watching her was like studying a masterpiece he had commissioned but never seen completed. She moved through the world like art in motion, seeing beauty and possibility where others saw only problems and deadlines. Her workspace was a controlled explosion of creativity, sketches pinned to every available surface, color swatches arranged in patterns that somehow made perfect sense. Plants growing in coffee cups because traditional pots were too ordinary for the way her mind worked. When she concentrated, she chewed on the end of her pencil exactly the way George had done at her age, a gesture so familiar it made his chest ache. "Maya has this gift," George heard David Chen, the creative director, telling Rita during one of their collaboration meetings. "She doesn't just design campaigns, she tells stories. Her mock-up for the Johnson account isn't just about selling cars, it's about families creating memories. She sees the emotion behind every brand, the human connection that turns customers into believers." George had positioned himself in the break room next to the conference room, pretending to refill his coffee while straining to hear every word. "About his daughter. She gets that from you," David continued. "The way you both think about marketing as relationship building rather than just message delivery. It's extraordinary. Maya's going to revolutionize how this industry thinks about authentic connection." Through the glass partition, George watched Rita's face soften with maternal pride. This was how she looked at their children, with infinite love and fierce protective devotion. He had seen that expression once before when she looked at ultrasound photos and whispered about the family they were going to be. Maya was sketching while the adults talked, her hand moving in fluid strokes that seemed to capture more than just lines and shapes. When she finished, she held up her pad to show a drawing that made George's breath catch in his throat. It was a family, 2 parents and 2 children, but the figures were incomplete, sketched in flowing lines that suggested rather than defined. The father figure was drawn in lighter strokes, almost transparent, as if he were more ghost than man. Was that how Maya saw families? With missing pieces and transparent fathers? Had his absence shaped her art the way his presence might have shaped her life? George began collecting Maya's work obsessively, salvaging discarded sketches from her trash can like a pathetic art scavenger. Her rejected concepts were better than most finished campaigns, filled with imagery that spoke to loss and healing, broken things being made beautiful, empty spaces being filled with love. One drawing in particular haunted him, a child's bedroom. At night, with 2 beds and a space where a third should be, light streamed through the window, illuminating the occupied beds while leaving the empty space in shadow. At the bottom, in Maya's flowing handwriting, were the words, "Some shadows are shaped like the people who should be there." Did she know? Did some part of her artist's soul sense that there should have been someone else in their family picture? Or was this just the universal longing for wholeness that drove all great art? George framed that sketch and hung it in his office, telling himself it was because he admired her talent. But late at night, when the building was empty and his guilt was loudest, he would stare at that drawing and wonder if his daughter was unconsciously calling out to the father she had never known. The twins' lunch routine became his obsession. Every day at 12:30, Marcus and Maya met in the cafeteria, their bond evident in the way they moved around each other like dancers who had been practicing the same routine for 22 years. They shared food without asking, finished each other's sentences, and communicated with glances that spoke of a lifetime of being each other's constant companion. George began eating lunch at the executive dining room, which had a clear view of the main cafeteria through floor-to-ceiling windows. He would position himself at a corner table with a newspaper as a prop, watching his children live their lives 40 feet away and an entire lifetime apart. They were so comfortable together, Marcus and Maya, so connected. George realized they had been each other's closest family member for their entire lives, not just siblings, but best friends forged in the fire of their father's abandonment. They had grown up protecting each other, supporting each other, being the family members they could count on when their father was nothing but a name on legal documents. Marcus protected Maya with subtle but fierce devotion. When other interns made thoughtless comments about her art being too emotional or too personal, Marcus would smoothly redirect the conversation while shooting looks that made it clear such criticism was unwelcome. When Maya got frustrated with a project, Marcus would appear with her favorite coffee and a joke that made her laugh until her shoulders relaxed. Maya, in turn, helped Marcus navigate the social complexities of office life with an artist's intuition for human nature. She would sketch portraits of their colleagues during meetings, capturing personality traits that helped Marcus understand how to communicate with different team members. When Marcus was nervous about a presentation, Maya would slip him one of her drawings, usually something that made him smile and remember his own strength. They were a complete unit, these children of his. They didn't need him because they had each other and Rita's unwavering love. But watching them, George began to understand what he had missed. Not just birthdays and graduations, but the daily miracle of watching 2 people grow up together, supporting each other, becoming the best versions of themselves through mutual love and loyalty. They're remarkable, George overheard Sarah telling another assistant. Those twins have this energy about them, like they could conquer the world together. And they're so respectful to everyone, from the CEO to the cleaning staff. Their mother must be incredibly proud. Their mother, always back to Rita, the woman who had done everything right while George had done everything wrong. Rita, who had somehow raised two extraordinary humans while dealing with her own heartbreak and abandonment. Rita, who had been worthy of the love George, had been too cowardice to give and too broken to receive. On Friday afternoon, George watched Maya show Marcus something on her tablet, probably sketches for a new project. Marcus studied her work with the kind of attention that spoke of genuine interest and brotherly pride. When he said something that made her beam with happiness, George felt his heart crack a little more. This was what family looked like. Not the corporate performance he had built his life around, but this, two people who loved each other unconditionally, who celebrated each other's victories and softened each other's defeats. This was what he could have been part of if he had been brave enough to stay and strong enough to grow. Instead, he was a stranger watching through windows, a ghost haunting the edges of lives he had helped create, but abandoned before they truly began. Marcus and Maya Williams-Dominic were magnificent, successful, beloved by their colleagues, and devoted to each other, and they were absolutely perfect without him. That realization should have comforted him, proof that his abandonment hadn't destroyed them, that Rita's love had been enough to raise them into incredible adults. Instead, it devastated him completely, because George was finally beginning to understand the true cost of his cowardice. He hadn't just missed their childhood, he had missed the chance to be shaped by their love. He had missed the opportunity to become a better man through the daily practice of being their father. Marcus and Maya didn't need him. They were complete without him. But George was finally realizing that he would never be complete without them, and that knowledge was the cruelest punishment of all. Chapter 5. Truth like a nuclear bomb. Maya discovered the truth on a rainy Thursday evening while helping Rita organize her home office for an upcoming business trip. It was supposed to be a simple task, filing contracts, organizing receipts, making sure everything was in order while Rita was away for the weekend conference. Maya had always loved these quiet domestic moments with her mother, times when Rita's fierce professional armor softened into something warmer and more vulnerable. "Can you grab that box from the top shelf, sweetheart?" Rita called from the bathroom where she was packing toiletries. "The one marked Tax Documents 2020. I need to make sure I have all the charitable donation receipts." Maya stretched on her tiptoes to reach the box, her fingertips barely grazing its edge. When she finally managed to pull it down, the bottom gave way slightly, spilling some of its contents onto the hardwood floor. As she knelt to gather the scattered papers, her hand froze on something that made her blood turn to ice. It was a photograph, faded with age but unmistakably clear. A young man with familiar green eyes, her eyes, held two tiny babies against his chest. His face was a mixture of wonder and terror, love and panic. He looked barely older than Maya was now, overwhelmed by the weight of the children in his arms. The babies were wearing hospital bracelets. One read, "Baby A. Williams-Dominic," and the other, "Baby B. Williams-Dominic." Maya's hands began to tremble as she realized she was looking at herself and Marcus as newborns, being held by a man who was clearly their father, a man who was very much alive. "Mother?" Maya's voice came out as a whisper. "Mother!" The photograph slipped from her shaking fingers as she reached deeper into the spilled contents of the box. There were more photos, dozens of them. The same young man kissing Rita's forehead in a hospital bed, him looking overwhelmed as a nurse showed him how to change a diaper, him sleeping in a chair next to Rita's bed, his hand resting protectively on her arm. And then there were the letters, pages and pages of them, written in Rita's careful handwriting, addressed to George Williams, at an address Maya didn't recognize. Rita appeared in the doorway, her face going white as she saw Maya, surrounded by the scattered contents of her most private box. "Maya, honey, don't." But Maya was already reading, her voice growing stronger and more horrified with each word. "Dear George, It's been 2 weeks since you left. The babies are healthy and beautiful, but they cry for you every night. I know. You're scared, but please come home. We can figure this out together. I love you. Please don't abandon us. Dated April 1st, 2003. Maya looked up at her mother with eyes full of betrayal and confusion. Mother, who is George Williams? Maya, please put those down. Let me explain. But Maya was already reaching for another letter, this one dated months later. George, I'm working 3 jobs now, but I don't care about the money. I care about our children asking why Daddy doesn't come home. Marcus said, Dada today, and I cried for 2 hours because you weren't here to witness his first word. Maya is rolling over now, reaching for things that aren't there. Sometimes I think she's reaching for you. Please, George, please come home to us. Our father isn't dead, is he? Maya's voice was barely audible, but it carried the weight of 22 years of lies crashing down around her. Rita sank into her desk chair, her face in her hands. Maya, sweetheart, is he dead or not? Maya screamed, the sound ripping through the quiet apartment like a thunderclap. The bathroom door slammed open, and Marcus appeared, his hair wet from the shower, concern written across his face. What's wrong? Maya, why are you... He stopped, mid-sentence, as he saw the photographs scattered across the floor. Maya held up the picture of George, holding them as babies, her hands shaking so violently the image blurred. Marcus, look at this. Marcus took the photograph with the same gentle care he used for everything precious, but Maya watched his face transform as comprehension dawned. His expression went from confusion to shock to something that looked like physical pain. This is our father, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Maya was pulling out more letters now, reading them with growing hysteria. Dear George, it's Christmas Eve. The twins are almost 10 months old now. I bought them presents from their father because I couldn't bear the thought of them having nothing from you on their first Christmas. I wrapped a teddy bear for Marcus and told him it was from Daddy. Maya got a little music box. When I wind it up and it plays Brahms' lullaby, she stops crying and looks around like she's listening for someone. I think she's listening for you. Stop, Marcus said quietly, but Maya couldn't stop. 22 years of deception was unraveling, and she needed to understand the scope of it. George, the twins are walking now. Marcus took his first steps toward the door yesterday like he was trying to find you. Maya drew her first picture, just scribbles, but I swear it looks like she drew 3 people instead of 2. How do I explain to them that their father chose to leave? How do I tell them they weren't enough to make you stay? Stop, Marcus roared. But Maya was in full devastation mode now, her voice rising to match his. It's been 2 years, George. 2 years of waiting for you to remember that you have children who need their father. I'm not calling anymore, I'm not writing anymore, but I want you to know that Marcus and Maya are extraordinary, and every day they grow up without you is another day you lose forever. I hope your freedom was worth our family. Maya looked up at Rita through tears of rage and betrayal. He's alive. Our father is alive, and he chose to leave us. Maya, Rita started, but Maya cut her off with a sound that was part laugh, part sob, part scream. 22 years. 22 years you let us believe he was dead. Let us grieve for a man who was just too much of a coward to be our father. Marcus was reading another letter, his hands trembling. George, I drove past your office building today with the twins. They're 3 now, and Maya asked why I was crying. I told her Mommy was just tired, but the truth is I was crying because I could see you through the window on the 45th floor. You looked successful, George. You looked happy. I'm glad our abandonment has worked out so well for you. The letter crumpled in Marcus's fist as rage overtook shock. He works downtown. He's been in the same city this entire time, living his life while we grew up without him. Maya was pulling out more photos now, newspaper clippings about George's business success, magazine articles featuring him as Chicago's most eligible bachelor, professional headshots that showed him aging gracefully while they grew up believing he was dead. "Look at this," Maya sobbed, holding up a business journal article. "Look at this. George Williams, CEO of Williams and Associates, builds marketing empire focused on family values." Family values. The irony was so vicious, it took Maya's breath away. Their father had built a fortune marketing family connections while abandoning his own family. He had made millions helping other companies sell the dream of perfect families while his own children grew up fatherless. Marcus stood up abruptly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "What's the address of his company?" Marcus. "No," Rita said, finally finding her voice. "You can't what?" Marcus exploded. 22 years of careful control, finally snapping. Can't confront the man who abandoned us? Can't demand to know why we weren't worth staying for? Can't ask our father why he chose to be dead to us while building an empire? Maya was hyperventilating now, gasping for air as the full weight of the deception hit her. All those times I wondered if he would have loved my art. All those Father's Day projects at school where I made cards for a dead man. All those nights I dreamed about him coming back somehow, and he was just choosing not to know us. Rita knelt beside Maya, trying to gather her into her arms, but Maya pulled away violently. "Don't touch me!" she screamed. "Don't touch me! You lied to us! You lied to us our entire lives!" "I was protecting you." "Protecting us from what?" "From knowing our father was a coward, from understanding that we weren't good enough for him to stay, from the truth that he looked at us as babies and decided we weren't worth the effort." Marcus was pacing now like a caged animal, his hands clenched into fists. "Williams and Associates, that's where we're working. That's where we've been working for 2 weeks. Maya's head snapped up. "What? George Williams? Williams and Associates? Maya, we've been working for our father. We've been working for the man who abandoned us, and he's been watching us, and he never said a word." The realization hit Maya like a physical blow. She doubled over, retching from the emotional impact. "He knows who we are. He's been watching us work, and he knows exactly who we are, and he's said nothing." "The orientation meeting," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "The way he looked at us, the way he and Rita, Mother, the way they looked at each other, they knew, they both knew, and they let us sit there like fools shaking hands with the man who abandoned us." Maya was reading the last letter now, dated just 6 months ago. "George, I saw your interview in Forbes about the importance of family in business. You talked about how children need stability and love to thrive. You talked about the responsibility parents have to their children. I wanted to send you this letter to let you know that our children have thrived. But not because of you. They've thrived because they had one parent who chose to stay. They've become extraordinary people in spite of your abandonment, not because of it. And tomorrow I start working at your company. Tomorrow you get to see exactly what you threw away. I hope you're ready for the consequences of your choices, because ready or not, they're coming." The apartment fell silent, except for Maya's sobbing and Marcus's heavy breathing. 22 years of carefully constructed protection had been destroyed. In 20 minutes of devastating truth. "Why?" Maya whispered, looking at Rita through tears. "Why didn't you tell us the truth?" Rita's own tears were falling freely now. "Because I loved you too much to let you grow up, knowing your father chose to leave you. I wanted you to believe you were loved, even if it was a lie. But we weren't loved," Maya screamed. "We weren't loved by him. We were abandoned. We were thrown away like trash." Marcus stopped pacing and looked at his mother with eyes full of pain. "All those times you said he was a hero who died. All those stories about how much he loved us. All those lies. They weren't lies about his love," Rita said desperately. For 17 minutes he loved you both more than anything in the world. I saw it in his eyes. But he was too young, too scared, too broken to fight for that love. 17 minutes, Maya repeated, her voice hollow. He loved us for 17 minutes, and then he decided we weren't worth the effort. The silence that followed was deafening. In the space of half an hour, Marcus and Maya's entire understanding of their family, their father, and their own worth had been obliterated. The man they had grieved for, dreamed about, and created elaborate fantasies around was not a dead hero, but a living coward who had chosen his own comfort over their need for a father. And tomorrow they would have to face him. Chapter 6. Son's Vengeance. Marcus didn't sleep. He couldn't eat. For 12 hours after discovering the truth about his father, he sat in his apartment staring at the photographs, the letters, the evidence of decades of abandonment. Maya had finally cried herself to sleep on their mother's couch, but Marcus felt too raw for rest, too angry for comfort. At 6 a.m., he made his decision. George Williams was going to face his son today. This morning, before Marcus lost his nerve, or Rita tried to stop him, or Maya talked him out of confronting the man who had chosen to be a stranger to them their entire lives. Marcus dressed carefully in his best suit, the one Rita had bought him for graduation, the one that made him look professional and successful and worthy of respect. He wanted to look like the man he had become, despite his father's abandonment, not because of anything George Williams had ever done for him. The elevator ride to the 45th floor felt like ascending to Judgment Day. Marcus's hands were steady, his breathing controlled, but inside his chest, a hurricane of 22 years of questions and pain was building toward devastating release. Sarah looked up from her desk with her usual bright smile. "Good morning, Marcus. You're here early today. Mr. Williams isn't usually in until—" "He's here," Marcus said simply. It wasn't a question. He had checked the parking garage and seen George's Mercedes in its reserved spot. "I need to speak with him. Do you have an appointment?" "I could schedule." "No appointment necessary." Marcus was already walking toward George's office, his voice carrying an authority that made Sarah's protest die in her throat. "This is a family matter." He didn't knock. After 22 years of being denied access to his father, Marcus Williams Domnish was done asking permission for what should have been his birthright. George looked up from his desk, coffee halfway to his lips, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been terror. He was older than in the photographs, grayer, lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. But it was definitely him, the man who had held Marcus as a baby for 17 minutes before deciding fatherhood was too difficult. "Marcus," George breathed, setting down his coffee with trembling hands. "What are you—" "Stand up," Marcus said quietly. "What?" "I said stand up." Marcus's voice was still quiet, but there was steel in it now, the kind of controlled fury that was more dangerous than screaming. "Stand up and look at me. Really, look at me." George rose slowly, his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of his desk like a lifeline. He was taller than Marcus by a few inches, but somehow he seemed smaller, diminished by the weight of his son's presence. "Do you know who I am?" Marcus asked, his voice deadly calm. "You're Marcus Williams Domnick. I'm your son." The words came out like a slap. "I'm your son, and for 22 years I thought you were dead. For 22 years I grieved for a father who chose to be dead to me while living less than 10 miles away." George's face crumpled. "Marcus, I can explain." "Explain!" The word exploded out of Marcus like a gunshot, and 22 years of careful control finally shattered. "Explain what?" "Explain how you held me and my sister as babies and then decided we weren't worth staying." Explain how you ignored our mother's calls for 2 years while she begged you to come home to your children." Marcus pulled out one of the letters, his hands shaking with rage. "Look at this." He shoved the paper toward George's face. "Look at what you did to my mother." George took the letter with trembling fingers, his eyes scanning Rita's desperate words. As he read, tears began streaming down his face, but Marcus felt no pity, only fury. "Dear George," Marcus recited from memory, his voice breaking with emotion. "It's been 6 months since you left. The twins are learning to smile now, but they save their biggest smiles for when they hear keys in the door. They think their daddy is coming home. I don't have the heart to tell them their daddy chose to leave them. Marcus, please, did you know she worked 3 jobs? Marcus's voice was raw now, stripped of all pretense. 3 jobs while going to school, while raising twins, while dealing with her own heartbreak over losing the man she loved. Did you know she used to fall asleep in her car between shifts because she was too exhausted to drive home? George was openly sobbing now, but Marcus couldn't stop. 22 years of pain was pouring out like blood from a mortal wound. You know I saved half my Halloween candy until I was 12 years old. 12! Because I thought maybe my daddy would come back and want to share it with me. Did you know Maya used to draw pictures of our family and always included an empty space because she said someone was missing, but she didn't know who? Stop, George whispered. But Marcus was just getting started. Stop! Stop! Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You want me to stop? You had over 2 decades to stop this conversation by having it when it mattered. You had all those years to be my father, and you chose not to. So no, I'm not stopping. You're going to hear every word of what your abandonment cost us. Marcus pulled out the photograph of George, holding them as babies, shoving it toward his father's face. Look at her! He screamed. Look at my mother in this picture. Look at how much she loved you. Look at how happy she was. George stared at the photo, his shoulders shaking with sobs. She was 23 years old, Marcus continued, his voice cracking with emotion. 23, and she was ready to build a life with you. She was ready to be a family. And you looked at that beautiful woman, looked at your children, and decided we weren't worth the effort. I was scared. Scared! Marcus roared. You were scared? Do you think my mother wasn't scared? Do you think she wasn't terrified of raising twins alone while finishing school and building a career? But she didn't run. She stayed. She fought. She became everything we needed because one parent decided to be nothing. Marcus was pacing now, too angry to stand still. Do you want to know what scared looks like? Scared looks like a single mother working midnight shifts at a diner, then going to class at 8 a.m., then picking up her children from daycare and helping them with homework while studying for her own exams. Scared looks like checking bank account balances and choosing between groceries and heat. Scared looks like explaining to 2 6-year-olds why other kids have daddies and they don't. George had collapsed into his chair, his face in his hands. I thought you'd be better off without me. You thought about yourself. Marcus slammed his hands on George's desk, making everything jump. You thought about your comfort, your freedom, your fear. You didn't think about us. You didn't think about what we needed or wanted or deserved. You made a decision based on your own cowardice and convinced yourself it was noble. Marcus pulled out another letter, this one stained with what looked like dried tears. George, I took the twins to the park today, and Maya asked me why all the other kids have daddies to push them on the swings. I told her some daddies have to go to heaven early, but she asked me if her daddy loved her enough to want to stay. I didn't know what to say, because the truth is, her daddy did have a choice, and he chose to leave. How do I explain that to a 5-year-old? George was making sounds now that barely qualified as crying, deep animal sounds of a man being emotionally eviscerated. Every school play where she saved you a seat in the front row, even though you were never coming. Every Father's Day when she made cards for a man she thought was dead, but who was actually just too selfish to acknowledge his children. every birthday cake where she lit an extra candle for Daddy in heaven while you were building your empire 10 miles away. Marcus leaned across the desk until he was inches from George's face. "Look at me," he demanded. "Look at me!" George raised his head, his eyes red and swollen. "This is your son," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet again. "This is what you threw away. I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern. I speak 3 languages. I've been mentoring at-risk youth for 3 years. I'm getting my MBA while working full-time. I'm everything you could have been proud of, everything you could have helped. Shape everything you lost when you decided being a father was too hard." George reached toward Marcus with a trembling hand. Marcus stepped back like his father's touch was poison. Don't you dare touch me. You lost the right to touch me 22 years ago when you walked out of that hospital." "I love you," George whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "I love you and Maya more than anything. I always have." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Love? You call abandonment love? You call 22 years of absence love? You call building a fortune on family values while ignoring your own family love? I was broken. We were all broken," Marcus roared. "You think you're the only one who was scared. You think you're the only one who didn't know how to be a parent. The difference is, Mother stayed broken with us while you ran away to heal yourself alone." Marcus pulled out the final letter, the one that had destroyed him the most. "George, Marcus is 18 today. He's valedictorian of his graduating class, and he's going to Northwestern on a full scholarship. He looks like you when you smile, but he has a strength you never showed. Maya is graduating too. She's been accepted to the Art Institute. They're extraordinary, George, and they became extraordinary despite your absence, not because of it. I wanted you to know that in case you ever wondered if abandoning us was the right choice, we didn't just survive without you. We thrived." George was broken now, completely shattered, but Marcus wasn't finished. "She sent you updates for 18 years, Marcus said, his voice full of wonder and rage. 18 years of letting you know how we were doing, what we were achieving, who we were becoming, and you never responded. Not once, not even to say you were proud or sorry or glad we were okay." "I didn't deserve—" "You're right," Marcus cut him off. "You didn't deserve updates. You didn't deserve to know about our achievements. You didn't deserve to watch us grow up from afar. But she gave that to you anyway, because she's a better person than you ever were." Marcus straightened his tie, composing himself with the same dignity Rita had taught him. "I want you to know something," he said, his voice steady again. "I want you to know that we turned out fine, better than fine. We turned out extraordinary. Maya is the most talented artist I've ever seen, and she's going to change the world with her work. I'm going to build businesses that help communities thrive. We're going to make the world better, because that's how Mother raised us." George nodded, tears still streaming down his face. "And I want you to know that we did all of that without you. We became the people we are through Mother's love and our own strength and each other's support. You contributed nothing but DNA and abandonment." Marcus walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. "The tragedy isn't that you missed our childhood, George. The tragedy is that we missed having a father. We missed having someone fight for us, protect us, be proud of us. We missed having a man in our lives who showed us what unconditional love looks like. Mother did her best, but she couldn't be everything." George looked up with something that might have been hope. Is there any way—" "No," Marcus said simply. "There's no going back. There's no fixing this. There's no relationship to build because you destroyed the foundation before we were old enough to know it existed." Marcus opened the door, then paused. "But I want you to see us every day. I want you to watch Maya create beautiful things and know you'll never be part of her inspiration. I want you to see me succeed and know you had nothing to do with who I became. I want you to live with the knowledge that your children turned out amazing despite you, not because of you." He stepped into the hallway, then spoke his final words. "Thank you for one thing, though. Thank you for showing me exactly the kind of father I never want to be." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving George Williams alone with the wreckage of his greatest failure and the devastating knowledge that he had lost the most precious things in his life through his own cowardice. In the hallway, Marcus leaned against the wall and finally let himself cry, not for the father he had lost, but for the father he had never been allowed to have. Chapter 7. When Hearts Collide. Maya didn't come to work on Friday. The day after, Marcus's devastating confrontation with George. She called in sick, her voice barely a whisper over the phone, as she told David Chen she had the flu. It wasn't entirely a lie. Discovering that your supposedly dead father was actually a living coward who had chosen to abandon you felt like being infected with a virus that attacked your very soul. Rita found her daughter exactly where she had left her the night before, curled on the living room couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes, surrounded by the scattered evidence of 22 years of deception. Maya had spent the night reading every letter, studying every photograph, trying to understand how the man who had looked at her with such wonder as a baby could have walked away from her so completely. "Sweetheart," Rita said gently, settling on the edge of the couch. "You need to eat something. You need to shower. The world is still turning, even though it feels like everything has stopped." Maya looked up at her mother with eyes that were red-rimmed and hollow. "How do you do it, Mother? How do you get up every day and pretend everything is normal when the person who was supposed to love you most chose to leave instead?" Rita's heart broke a little more. "You do it because you have to. Because giving up means he wins. Because there's still beauty in the world worth fighting for, even when it feels impossible to see." "I can't go back there," Maya whispered. "I can't work in his building, breathe his air, pretend I don't know who he is. I can't look at him and not see the man who decided I wasn't worth staying for." "Then don't," Rita said simply. "Take today. Take the weekend. But don't let his cowardice keep you from your dreams. Don't let his failure become yours." But Maya had already made a decision that would change everything. Monday morning found Maya standing outside the Williams & Associates building at 7 a.m., 2 hours before she was supposed to be at work. She had spent the weekend painting violent, angry canvases that bled emotion across her studio floor. She had painted abandonment as a dark figure walking away from light. She had painted mother's love as a golden warrior standing guard over two small figures. She had painted father hunger as an empty space shaped like a man, with two children reaching toward the void. The paintings had purged some of her anger, but not her need for answers, not her desperate desire to understand why she hadn't been enough to make him stay. Maya entered the building before the morning rush, using her employee keycard to access the creative department. She had a presentation that afternoon. The Johnson automotive account that David Chen had mentioned was make or break for her evaluation. She was supposed to present concepts for a campaign celebrating family road trips, the irony of which wasn't lost on her. She spread her materials across the conference table with obsessive precision. This presentation had to be perfect, not because she wanted to impress George Williams. She wanted nothing from him, but because she refused to let his abandonment affect her professional excellence. She would succeed in spite of him, just as she had lived her entire life in spite of him. Maya was practicing her presentation when other employees began arriving. Through the glass walls, she could see the normal morning routine, people grabbing coffee, chatting about weekend plans, settling into the comfortable rhythm of another workday. She envied them their normalcy, their uncomplicated relationships with their existence. At 10 a.m., David Chen stuck his head into the conference room. "Maya, you're here early. Everything okay? Fine, she lied smoothly. Just wanted to make sure everything was perfect for this afternoon. Well, it's going to be great. The client specifically requested something authentic, something that captures the real emotional connection families have with travel. You've got exactly the right sensibility for this. Family, authentic emotional connection. Maya almost laughed at the cosmic joke of it all. The morning passed in a blur of final preparations and mounting anxiety. Maya had never been nervous about presentations before. She believed in her work, trusted her vision, knew how to connect with clients. But today felt different. Today, every word about families felt like salt in an open wound. At 2 p.m., the conference room filled with people. The Johnson Automotive executives, David Chen, several account managers, and, Maya's heart stopped, George Williams himself. He had apparently decided to attend this particular client presentation, something David mentioned he rarely did anymore. George looked terrible. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, who was carrying weight too heavy for his shoulders. When his eyes met Maya's across the conference room, she saw something that might have been recognition, regret, and desperate longing. Maya forced herself to look away. She couldn't think about him as anything other than the CEO whose approval didn't matter to her. She couldn't think about the fact that this was her father, watching her professional debut, that part of her had always dreamed about making her parents proud. "Ladies and gentlemen," David began, "I'm excited to present Maya Williams-Dominick's concept for the Johnson family travel campaign. Maya is one of our most promising creative talents, and I think you'll be impressed by her vision." Maya stood, her hands steady despite the storm raging in her chest. She had trained herself over 22 years to compartmentalize emotion, to function under pressure, to be excellent even when her heart was breaking. "Thank you for this opportunity," she began, her voice clear and professional. The Johnson automotive brand has always been about connection. Connecting families to destinations, connecting people to experiences, connecting generations through shared memories. She clicked to her first slide, a beautiful illustration of a family loading luggage into a car, children's faces bright with excitement, parents sharing a look of loving anticipation. "But what makes travel meaningful isn't the destination," Maya continued. "It's the journey. It's the songs you sing together. It's the games you play to pass time. It's the stops you make for ice cream and the stories you tell to keep each other entertained." As she spoke, Maya became aware of George's intense attention. She could feel his eyes on her, studying her every gesture, hanging on her every word. It should have made her uncomfortable, but instead it fueled her performance. She wanted him to see exactly what he had missed, exactly how extraordinary she had become without him. "This campaign celebrates the small moments that become lifelong memories," Maya said, advancing to a slide, showing a father teaching his daughter to read a map, both of them laughing at their confusion. "It's about the way families create their own traditions, their own inside jokes, their own language of love." George made a sound, barely audible, but Maya heard it. When she glanced at him, his eyes were filled with tears he was trying desperately to hide. Maya continued with growing confidence, describing family dynamics with the insight of someone who had spent her life observing what she didn't have. She talked about the way parents and children connect through shared adventure, the way trust is built through navigating challenges together, the way love is expressed through the simple act of choosing to spend time together. "The tagline I'm proposing," Maya said, advancing to her final slide, "is every mile together matters, because it's not about the distance you travel, it's about the fact that you choose to travel it together." The room was silent for a moment, then erupted in appreciative murmurs. The Johnson executives were nodding enthusiastically, clearly impressed by Maya's vision and presentation skills. "That was extraordinary," the lead client said. You've captured exactly what we were hoping. For the emotional truth of family travel, without being sentimental or cliched. Maya should have felt triumphant. She should have been glowing with professional pride. Instead, she felt hollow, like she was performing her own life from outside her body. "Thank you," she said, gathering her materials. "I'm glad the concept resonates with your vision." As the room emptied, Maya stayed behind to pack up her presentation materials. Her hands were shaking now that the performance was over. The adrenaline crash, leaving her vulnerable and raw. "Maya." George's voice behind her made her freeze. She had hoped he would leave with the others, that she could avoid any direct interaction. "With him, Ms. Williams-Dominic," she corrected without turning around. "We're not on a first-name basis." That was beautiful," George said quietly. "Your presentation, your insights about families. You have a gift for understanding human connection." Maya laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "Do I? How interesting that I understand family connection when I've never experienced it myself." "Maya, don't." She spun around to face him, her professional composure finally cracking. "Don't you dare speak to me like you know me. Don't you dare act like you have any right to comment on my work or my insights or my understanding of anything." George took a step toward her, his face full of pain. "I know I don't have the right. I know I forfeited any claim to—" "You forfeited everything." Maya's voice was rising now, 22 years of father hunger finally finding its voice. "You forfeited the right to be proud of me. You forfeited the right to watch me grow up. You forfeited the right to know anything about who I am or what I've become." The stress, the sleepless nights, the emotional devastation of the past week were all catching up with her at once. Maya felt her chest tightening, her breathing becoming shallow and fast. "You want to know about family connection?" she gasped, panic overtaking her. "You want to know about travel memories and shared adventures? I'll tell you what my travel memories are. Road trips with just Mother and Marcus, always 3 seats. In the car with one empty, always 3 beds in hotel rooms with one that stayed made." Her breathing was becoming more erratic now, her vision starting to blur at the edges. Every vacation photo with a space where a father should be. Maya was crying and hyperventilating simultaneously. Every family restaurant that asked if we were waiting for someone else, because surely 3 people couldn't be a complete family. George moved toward her instinctively, his face transformed with concern. "Maya, you need to sit down. You're having a panic attack." "Don't touch me," she sobbed, but her legs were giving out beneath her. "Don't you dare touch me. You don't get to help me. You don't get to care about me now." But George was already there, catching her as she collapsed, lowering her gently into a chair. His hands were steady and sure as he guided her head between her knees, his voice soft and calming as he talked her through breathing exercises. "In for 4 counts, he said gently. "Hold for 4, out for 6. That's it. You're safe. You're going to be fine." Maya wanted to push him away, wanted to maintain her anger and independence, but she was drowning in panic, and his presence was the only thing keeping her afloat. His voice was exactly what she had always imagined her father's voice would sound like, deep and reassuring and infinitely gentle. "I've got you," George whispered, one hand resting lightly on her back, the other holding a glass of water that had appeared from somewhere. "Just breathe. Just focus on breathing." As her panic subsided and her breathing normalized, Maya became aware of where she was, sitting in a conference room, being comforted by the man who had abandoned her, feeling safer than she had in weeks, despite every logical reason to feel the opposite. "Why?" she whispered, not looking at him. "Why wasn't I enough? Why weren't we enough to make you stay?" George's intake of breath was sharp and painful. When Maya finally looked up at him, she saw tears streaming down his face. "You were everything," he said, his voice breaking. "You and Marcus were everything I'd ever dreamed of, and more than I believed I deserved." Leaving you wasn't about you not being enough. It was about me being too broken to believe I could be the father you needed." "That's not good enough," Maya whispered. "That's not an answer. That's just another way of saying we weren't worth fighting for." "You're right," George said simply. "It's not good enough. There is no good enough answer for what I did to you and Marcus and your mother. There's no excuse that makes abandoning my family acceptable." For the first time in her life, Maya was looking directly into her father's eyes while he looked back at her. She could see herself in his features, the shape of his nose, the set of his mouth, the way his eyebrows drew together when he was concentrating. But she could also see something else, genuine remorse, desperate love, and the kind of regret that had been eating him alive for 22 years. "I can't forgive you," she said quietly. "I don't expect you to," George replied. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm grateful for this moment, for getting to see who you've become. You're extraordinary, Maya. You're everything good about your mother and somehow none of the weakness that destroyed me." Maya stood up slowly, her panic attack over, but her emotions still raw. "I need to go." "Of course," George said, stepping back to give her space. Will you be okay getting home?" The concern in his voice was so paternal, so naturally protective, that it made Maya's chest ache with longing for what could have been. "I've been getting myself home for 22 years, she said. "I think I can manage." She gathered her things and walked toward the door, then stopped without turning around. "George, yes? That presentation about family travel memories. I made it all up. I have no idea what those kinds of memories feel like, because I never had a father to make them with." The door closed behind her, leaving George alone with the devastating knowledge that his daughter was brilliant, beautiful, and broken in ways that were entirely his fault. But for 17 minutes in a conference room, Maya had let him help her. For 17 minutes she had accepted comfort from the father she had never known. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't redemption, but it was a crack in the wall between them, and George clung to it like the drowning man he was. Chapter 8. The slow burn of revenge and love. 3 weeks after Maya's breakdown in the conference room, Rita Dominic was discovering that revenge was far more complicated than she had anticipated. Her original plan had been simple: infiltrate George's world, force him to see what he had thrown away, watch him suffer the consequences of his abandonment, then walk away victorious with her children intact and her justice served. But watching George's genuine anguish was proving less satisfying than she had expected, and seeing the effect his presence was having on Marcus and Maya, not just pain, but confusion, curiosity, and reluctant longing, was making her question whether her carefully orchestrated vengeance was healing old wounds or creating new ones. Rita stood in her office on the 36th floor, looking down at the courtyard where George sat alone on a bench during his lunch break. He had been eating outside every day since Maya's panic attack, as if punishing himself by removing the comfort of his executive dining room. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of finally facing his failures. "You're watching him again," David Chen observed, entering her office with project files. "You've been watching him a lot lately." Rita turned from the window, forcing her professional mask back into place. "I'm observing the company dynamics, understanding how leadership functions here." David raised an eyebrow. "Rita, I've known you for 5 years through industry connections. I've never seen you this invested in understanding leadership dynamics, what's really going on." Rita considered how much to reveal. David was a good man, trustworthy and discreet, but this situation was beyond complicated. "George Williams and I have a history," she said carefully. "What kind of history?" "The kind that produces 2 exceptional children and 22 years of regret." David's eyes widened as comprehension dawned. "Marcus and Maya are his children. Yes, children he abandoned as babies and hasn't seen since. David sank into a chair, processing this information. "And you took this job because I wanted him to see what his cowardice cost all of us. I wanted him to understand exactly what he threw away." Rita's voice was steady, but David could hear the underlying pain. "I spent 2 years planning this moment. And now?" Rita looked back out the window. George was feeding pigeons from his sandwich, his movements slow and deliberate. "Now I'm not sure whether I'm healing or just spreading the pain around more efficiently." Meanwhile, on the 32nd floor, Marcus was having his own complicated relationship with revenge. He had expected to feel triumphant after confronting George, satisfied by delivering 22 years of accumulated fury directly to its target. Instead, he felt hollow, like he had screamed into a void and received only echoes of his own pain in return. But something had changed after his confrontation. George had stopped trying to approach him directly, but Marcus had begun noticing small acts of intervention that bore George's invisible fingerprints. When Marcus's girlfriend, Sophia, received a letter informing her that her student visa extension had been approved, after months of bureaucratic delays that had threatened her doctoral program. The immigration lawyer mentioned that an anonymous benefactor had expedited the process and covered all associated costs. When the inner-city youth program Marcus volunteered with suddenly received a substantial grant to expand their financial literacy curriculum. The funding came from a foundation that Marcus discovered, after some research, was quietly backed by Williams and Associates. When Marcus's laptop was stolen from his car, and he mentioned needing to replace it but worried about the expense, a brand new MacBook Pro appeared on his desk the next morning with a note from IT saying there had been a clerical error in equipment allocation that worked in his favor. George never took credit, never mentioned these interventions, never acted like he expected gratitude or recognition. He was helping Marcus's life function more smoothly while maintaining complete distance, like a guardian angel with a guilt complex. Marcus didn't know how to feel about this invisible support. Part of him wanted to reject any help from the man who had abandoned him. But another part, the part that had always wondered what it would feel like to have a father who cared about his well-being, found itself reluctantly touched by George's quiet consistency. Maya's relationship with her father's presence was even more complex. After her breakdown, she had expected George to use her moment of vulnerability as an opening for further contact. Instead, he had given her space while finding subtle ways to support her professional development. Maya discovered that several of her art pieces had been anonymously purchased at significantly above asking price, with the gallery owner mentioning that the buyer had specifically requested her work and seemed very knowledgeable about her artistic vision. When Maya needed specialized software for a project, but the department budget was tight, David Chen informed her that a company software upgrade had made the programs available to all creative staff. When Maya's studio apartment flooded and she was struggling to find temporary housing she could afford, her landlord called to say that a good Samaritan had covered the costs of emergency repairs and temporary relocation, asking only that Maya never know the source of the assistance. George was taking care of her from the shadows, the way he should have been taking care of her for 22 years. It was too little, too late, but it was consistent, thoughtful, and completely without expectation of acknowledgement. The most significant change, however, was in Rita's daily interactions with George. Their professional relationship required regular meetings, strategic discussions, and collaborative decision-making. Rita had expected these encounters to be battles, opportunities to demonstrate her superiority and his irrelevance. Instead, they were becoming something more complicated. Conversations between two people who had once loved each other deeply and were slowly rediscovering the intelligence, humor, and fundamental decency that had drawn them together in the first place. The ties. Morrison account needs a complete strategic overhaul, Rita said during their weekly planning meeting. Their current messaging feels manufactured, disconnected from actual consumer experience. I agree, George replied, studying her proposal. Your recommendation for authentic storytelling rather than aspirational marketing, it's brilliant. It's exactly the kind of innovative thinking this industry needs. Rita felt a flicker of the old pride she used to feel when George praised her ideas. Before she could stop herself, she smiled. A real smile, not the professional mask she usually wore in his presence. You always did understand my vision, she said, then immediately regretted the personal reference. George looked up from the documents, his eyes searching her face. I understood your vision, Rita. I just wasn't brave enough to be part of it. These moments were becoming more frequent, brief cracks in Rita's armor where the woman she had been with him flickered to life before being quickly suppressed by the woman she had become without him. Why didn't you fight for us? Rita asked. During another meeting, the question escaping before her professional filter could stop it. George set down his pen and looked at her directly. Because I was 23 years old and terrified of everything. Terrified of failing you, terrified of failing the twins, terrified of becoming my father. I convinced myself that leaving was protecting you from my inadequacy. And now? Now, I know that the only inadequacy that mattered was my inability to fight for what I loved most. Rita studied his face, looking for traces of the boy she had loved beneath the man he had become. 22 years of therapy, George? 22 years of trying to become worthy of forgiveness I don't deserve. These conversations were dangerous territory for Rita. They reminded her of late-night talks when they were young, when George's vulnerability had been one of the things she loved most about him. She couldn't afford to remember that version of him, not when she had spent decades building armor against the pain his absence had caused. But George was making it difficult to maintain her anger through his consistent, selfless actions. He wasn't trying to buy forgiveness or manipulate emotions. He was simply, quietly, taking care of the people he had failed to take care of when it mattered most. When Rita mentioned struggling to find reliable childcare for her elderly neighbor's grandchildren while the neighbor recovered from surgery, George quietly arranged for a vetted, professional service to provide temporary assistance at no cost to the family. When Rita's car broke down, and she was frustrated about having to rent a replacement while dealing with expensive repairs, she arrived at work the next morning to find a reliable used car in the parking garage, with a note saying the company had acquired it for employee transportation needs, and she should consider it a work vehicle for as long as necessary. George was taking care of Rita the way he should have been taking care of her for 22 years, but without any expectation of credit or gratitude. He was proving through actions rather than words that he had learned to put her needs before his own comfort. This is sophisticated revenge, Rita told herself, but increasingly it felt less like victory and more like watching someone she had once loved desperately trying to earn back what he had voluntarily thrown away. The breaking point came during a late evening strategy session when George and Rita were alone in the conference room, working on a complex client presentation. It was past 9 p.m., the building mostly empty, the city lights creating an intimate atmosphere that reminded Rita uncomfortably of their younger selves working together on school projects. "You've built something extraordinary," George said quietly, reviewing Rita's strategic framework. "This company is better because you're here. Marcus and Maya are remarkable because of how you raised them. You succeeded at everything I was too afraid to even attempt." Rita looked up from her laptop, seeing genuine admiration in his eyes. "Don't romanticize my success, George. I didn't have a choice. I had to succeed because failure meant my children suffered. That's what makes it extraordinary, George replied. You turned necessity into excellence. You turned abandonment into strength. You became everything they needed when I chose to be nothing. Why are you helping them? Rita asked suddenly. The scholarships, the visa assistance, the art purchases. Why are you doing it? George was quiet for a long moment. Because I love them, because I've loved them every day for 22 years. And helping them is the only way I can express that love without causing them more pain. And what about me? The question escaped before Rita could stop it. Are you helping me because you love me too? George's eyes met hers across the conference table, and for a moment 22 years collapsed into nothing. He was the boy who had traced her face with gentle fingers, who had whispered promises about their future, who had looked at her like she was his entire world. I never stopped loving you, Rita, he said quietly. But I lost the right to tell you that when I walked away from us. Rita felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. This was the conversation she had been avoiding, the emotional territory that threatened to undermine everything she had built in his absence. Love isn't enough, she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. No, George agreed. Love isn't enough, but maybe love plus action, love plus consistency, love plus putting your needs before my fear. Maybe that could be something worth considering. Rita stood abruptly, gathering her materials. The conversation was becoming too dangerous, too reminiscent of what they had been, before fear destroyed it. I should go, she said. Maya's expecting me home. Rita. George's voice stopped her at the door. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm just asking you to know that every day I choose to be better than I was is because you and Marcus and Maya exist in the world. Rita didn't respond, but she also didn't leave immediately. She stood in the doorway, her back to him, feeling the weight of his words and the dangerous pull of old love trying to resurface. The revenge isn't working, she said finally, without turning around. Good, George replied. I was hoping it wouldn't. Rita walked away before she could ask him what he meant, but his words followed her home and kept her awake that night, wondering if the line between justice and healing was thinner than she had realized. In their separate homes, Marcus, Maya, Rita and George all lay awake that night, each struggling with the uncomfortable realization that their carefully maintained positions were beginning to shift, that the clear lines between victim and perpetrator, abandoned and abandoner, were becoming blurred by the messy reality of human emotion and the radical possibility of forgiveness. Chapter 9. Building Love from Ashes. 2 months after Rita's carefully planned revenge had begun unraveling into something more complicated, Maya Williams-Dominic stood before her first solo art exhibition in a converted warehouse gallery in Chicago's Arts District. The space buzzed with energy. Art critics, collectors, fellow artists and supporters filled the exposed brick halls, wine glasses in hand, studying her work with the kind of attention every artist dreams of receiving. Maya should have been glowing with pride. The exhibition, titled Empty Spaces and Full Hearts, was garnering serious critical attention. 3 major pieces had already sold, and several gallery owners had approached her about future shows. This was the kind of career breakthrough that could define her artistic trajectory for years to come. But Maya couldn't focus on the professional triumph because she was scanning the crowd for a face she both hoped and feared to see. Rita moved through the gallery like a proud lioness, stunning in a black cocktail dress that highlighted her success and sophistication. She stopped at each piece, reading the artist's statements with maternal pride, accepting congratulations from the other attendees with gracious warmth. Marcus stood beside one of Maya's largest works, a massive canvas titled The Father Space. explaining to an art collector how his sister had used negative space and light to represent absence as a presence unto itself. He was comfortable in this environment, proud of Maya's achievement, but Maya could see him glancing toward the entrance every few minutes, the same nervous anticipation she was feeling. "This piece is extraordinary," the collector was saying. To Marcus, "The way she's made emptiness feel so full of emotion. It's technically brilliant, but also deeply moving." The father figure isn't physically present, but his absence creates its own powerful presence. Maya watched Marcus nod thoughtfully. "My sister has always been gifted at finding beauty in broken things," he said. "She sees wholeness where others see gaps." The irony wasn't lost on Maya that her most successful exhibition was built around the theme of paternal absence, and she was spending the entire evening hoping her father would appear. At 8:30 p.m., just as Maya was beginning to accept that George wouldn't come, she saw Rita freeze near the gallery entrance. Following her mother's gaze, Maya's heart stopped. George Williams stood in the doorway, looking uncertain and out of place among the art world crowd. He wore a simple dark suit rather than his usual expensive business attire, as if he had deliberately chosen to look less intimidating, less successful, more human. In his hands was a small wrapped gift, and his eyes were scanning the crowd with the nervous energy of a man who wasn't sure he belonged but couldn't stay away. Maya watched her parents look at each other across the crowded gallery. Even from a distance, she could see the complex emotions playing across both their faces: surprise, wariness, and underneath it all, the kind of recognition that spoke of shared history and complicated love. George approached slowly, carefully, giving Rita space to tell him to leave if she chose to. When he reached her, Maya was close enough to hear their conversation. "I wasn't sure I should come," George said quietly, "but I couldn't miss this. Not Maya's first exhibition." "How did you know about it?" Rita asked, though her tone was more curious than accusatory. "Marcus mentioned it during a meeting. He didn't invite me, but he seemed so proud of her work that I—" George trailed off, looking vulnerable. "I should have asked permission. I can leave if—" "No," Rita said, surprising herself. "You should see this. You should see what she's accomplished." George's relief was visible. "Thank you." Maya pretended to be engaged in conversation with a gallery patron while watching her parents navigate this delicate interaction. There was something different about seeing them together in a context that wasn't work-related, something that reminded her of the young couple in the photographs she had discovered. "George," Rita said carefully, "there's something you should know about the art, about the themes Maya explores. It might be difficult for you." "I understand," George replied. "Marcus warned me that much of her work deals with absence, with family incompleteness. I'm prepared for that." But George wasn't prepared for the emotional impact of seeing his daughter's talent channeled into exploring the very wounds his abandonment had created. The first piece he encountered was titled Waiting Room, a painting of a hospital corridor with 2 empty chairs and a woman holding 2 babies. Her face, a mixture of hope and dawning despair. The detail was photographic, but the emotional content was devastating. It was clearly inspired by the day George had left them at the hospital. George stood before the painting for several minutes, tears streaming down his face as other gallery patrons moved around him. Rita watched from across the room, seeing him confront the artistic interpretation of his greatest failure. Maya appeared beside him, her presence announced by the gentle sound of her heels on the concrete floor. "You came," she said quietly, not looking at him directly. "I hope that's okay," George replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I don't have the right to be here, but—" "You don't," Maya agreed, "but I'm glad you are." They stood together in front of Waiting Room, father and daughter, both studying the artistic representation of the moment that had defined their entire relationship. It's beautiful, George said finally. Devastating, but beautiful. You've turned our pain into something meaningful. Art is how I process things I can't understand, Maya said. I've been painting father absence my entire life without realizing it. George moved to the next piece. Mother Warrior. A portrait of Rita as a fierce protector, her face showing both strength and exhaustion, her arms wrapped around two children who were painted in golden light, while she remained in shadow, sacrificing her own illumination to keep them bright. This is how you see your mother, George observed. This is how mother is, Maya corrected. She gave up pieces of herself to make sure Marcus and I stayed whole. They moved through the exhibition together, and strange procession of artist and absent father, Maya explaining her techniques and vision, while George absorbed the visual narrative of what his abandonment had cost his family. At the empty chair at Christmas, a painting of a holiday dinner with 3 place settings and one conspicuously absent seat, George broke down completely. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not caring who might see him crying in a public gallery. "I'm so sorry for all of it." "I know," Maya said simply. "I can see it in how you've been taking care of us lately. The art purchases, the software, helping Marcus with Sophia's visa situation. You think we don't know it's you, but we do." George looked at her in surprise. "I didn't want credit. We know that too. That's why it matters." Marcus appeared beside them, drawn by some instinct that his family was having an important moment. "You made it," he said to George, his tone neutral but not hostile. "Maya's work is extraordinary," George replied. "You both turned out so much better than I ever imagined possible." "We turned out despite you, not because of you," Marcus said, but without the venom he would have used months ago. "I know that," George said. "That makes it even more remarkable." The 3 of them stood together before Maya's centerpiece, a massive canvas titled Empty Spaces and Full Hearts. It showed a family of 3 in golden light, but their shadows suggested a 4th figure, the missing father present only as negative space that somehow made the family's love more visible. By contrast, "This one's not for sale," Maya said quietly. "Why not?" George asked. Maya looked at him directly for the first time that evening. "Because it's still evolving. The story isn't finished yet." As the evening progressed, George remained in the background, letting Maya have her moment while watching with the kind of paternal pride he had never earned the right to feel. He bought a small sketch, not through anonymous channels this time, but openly, wanting Maya to know he valued her work enough to own it honestly. When the gallery began to empty, Rita found herself standing next to George in front of Mother Warrior. "She painted you as a saint," George observed. "She painted me as I had to be," Rita corrected. "Single motherhood doesn't leave room for weakness." "You were always strong," George said. "Even at 23, you were stronger than I was. Strength isn't genetic, George. It's developed through necessity." They watched Maya accept congratulations from the gallery owner, her face glowing with the kind of satisfaction that came from professional recognition and artistic achievement. "She's extraordinary," George said. "They both are," Rita agreed, "and they did it without you." "I know," George said. "That's what makes tonight so beautiful and so painful. I get to see what they became, but I also have to accept that I contributed nothing but DNA and abandonment." Rita studied his profile, seeing genuine remorse and acceptance rather than self-pity. "The revenge didn't work the way I planned it," she said quietly. "I'm glad," George replied. "Revenge would have meant you stayed angry. This feels like something healthier." "I don't know what this is," Rita admitted. "Maybe it doesn't need a name yet." As they prepared to leave, Maya approached George. With the small wrapped gift he had brought, "You didn't have to bring anything," she said. "I wanted to," George replied. "It's not much, but—" Maya unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a vintage art supply set, expensive brushes, professional-grade paints, the kind of tools serious artists treasured. "These are beautiful," Maya said, running her fingers over the brushes. "But they're too expensive. They belong to my mother," George interrupted. "She painted as a hobby when I was young, before she became someone else. I found them in her things after she died, and I've been keeping them, not sure why. But seeing your work tonight, I think I understand. She would have loved your art, Maya. She would have been so proud to have these tools used by someone with real talent." Maya looked up at him, surprised by this glimpse into his family history, this connection to grandparents she had never known. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll take good care of them. I know you will." As they left the gallery together, not as a family, but as four people connected by blood and history and the fragile possibility of healing, George fell into step slightly behind the others, content to follow rather than lead, to be included, rather than central. On the sidewalk, as they prepared to go their separate ways, Maya turned back to him. "George," she said, using his first name for the first time, "thank you for coming tonight. It meant something to have you see my work." "Thank you for letting me stay," George replied. "Watching you shine tonight was one of the best moments of my life." Rita and the twins headed toward Rita's car, while George walked toward his own vehicle. But before they separated completely, Rita called out to him, "George." He turned, hope flickering in his eyes. "Next Thursday is Marcus's graduation from the MBA program," Rita said. If you thought you could handle it without making things complicated, I would love to be there," George said immediately, "if Marcus is okay with it." Marcus, who had been listening to this exchange, considered for a moment before responding. "You can come," he said finally. "But you sit in the back, and if you make Mother cry, I'll make sure you regret it." George nodded solemnly. "Understood." As they finally parted ways, each returning to their separate lives, all four of them carried something different than they had when the evening began. The walls between them were still there, but they were lower now, with windows that let light pass through. Maya clutched her grandmother's art supplies, thinking about family legacies and the mysterious ways love could be transmitted across generations, even through absence and loss. Marcus walked with the knowledge that his father had come to support Maya without being asked, that George was slowly proving himself worthy of small acts of trust. Rita drove home with the unsettling realization that she was beginning to see glimpses of the man she had once loved beneath the coward who had hurt her so deeply. And George returned to his empty penthouse, carrying the memory of standing beside his daughter while she explained her art, of being included in a family moment he had no right to share, of watching his children shine in ways that had nothing to do with him, but everything to do with the love Rita had given them in his absence. The healing was slow, imperfect, and painful, but it was real. And for the first time in 22 years, George Williams began to believe that love might be more powerful than the mistakes that had nearly destroyed it. Chapter 10. When Love Conquers All. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in late November, when Chicago's first real snow was falling in thick, silent flakes. George was in his office working late, as had become his habit since Maya's art exhibition. Not because he had pressing business, but because going home meant too many hours alone with thoughts of family and the fragile hope growing in his chest. His phone rang with Rita's number, and for a moment his heart lifted. "Rita?" he answered, already smiling. The sound that came through the phone destroyed him completely. Rita was sobbing, not crying, but making sounds that came from the deepest places of human anguish. "George," she choked out. "George, you have to come. You have to come right now." Ice flooded his veins. "What happened? Rita, what's wrong?" "It's Maya," Rita whispered, and those two words contained every parent's worst nightmare. "There was an accident. A car accident. She's... Oh, God. George, she's hurt so bad. The phone slipped from George's hands. Snow, black ice, Maya driving home from a late study session, her car sliding into oncoming traffic, emergency surgery, critical condition, Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the same hospital where she had been born, where George had held her for 17 minutes before walking away. George was moving before his conscious mind caught up, grabbing his coat, his keys, running toward the elevator with desperation that felt like drowning. The years of regret and distance collapsed into a single, overwhelming truth. His daughter was dying, and nothing else in the world mattered. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of snow and terror. George found himself praying to a God he hadn't spoken to in decades, making bargains he had no right to make, offering his own life in exchange for his daughter's. Northwestern Memorial's emergency department was controlled chaos. George burst through the sliding doors, scanning the waiting area until he found them. Rita sat in a plastic chair, still wearing her elegant business dress. But now it was wrinkled and stained with what looked like blood, Maya's blood. Her face was streaked with tears, her hands shaking as she clutched a phone that kept ringing with calls she couldn't answer. Marcus paced behind her like a caged animal, his usually perfect composure completely shattered. His shirt was torn, and there was a cut on his forehead that suggested he had been at the accident scene. When Rita looked up and saw George approaching, something in her face broke completely. All the walls she had spent months carefully constructing crumbled into nothing. "George," she sobbed, and then she was in his arms, collapsing against his chest. "She's in surgery. She's been in surgery for 4 hours. They won't tell us anything. There was so much blood." George held Rita while she fell apart, his own tears streaming as the full weight hit him. Maya, his brilliant, beautiful daughter, who painted hope and turned pain into art, was fighting for her life, and there was nothing he could do but wait and hold the woman he had failed decades ago. "I'm here," he whispered into Rita's hair. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, we face this together." Marcus stopped pacing and looked at George with eyes that held too much adult pain. "She was coming home from the library," he said, his voice hollow. "She called me 20 minutes before the accident, laughing about something stupid. She was happy, George. She was finally happy again." George reached out and pulled Marcus into the embrace, holding both Rita and his son while they broke down. Completely. In this sterile waiting room, with their world falling apart, the artificial boundaries between them dissolved. "She's strong," George said, meaning every word. "She's Rita's daughter. She's a fighter." Hours passed. The waiting room emptied as other families received news and went home to their changed lives. But the Williams family remained, holding vigil. For Maya, George never left Rita's side. When she needed coffee, he got it. When she needed to call Maya's friends, he held the phone while she cried through the conversations. He was being the partner he should have been years ago, showing up in the way he had failed to show up when they were young, and building a family together. At 6 a.m., Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the surgical wing, still wearing scrubs, her face exhausted but not devastated. "The surgery went well," Dr. Chen said, and Rita's knees buckled with relief. George caught her before she could fall. "Maya sustained significant injuries, but we were able to repair the damage. She's stable now." "Can we see her?" Rita asked immediately. "She's being moved to the ICU. She's still unconscious, and it may be several hours before she wakes up. But yes, you can see her, family only." George started to step back, but Rita's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. "Your family," she said fiercely, looking him directly in the eyes. "You're her father. You belong here." The ICU was a maze of machines and monitors. Maya looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, connected to tubes and wires. Her face was bruised and swollen, her usually vibrant spirit reduced to the steady beep of machines measuring her heartbeat. George approached the bed, like he was approaching sacred ground, afraid his presence might disturb the delicate balance, keeping his daughter alive. When he saw her lying there so still, so vulnerable, he fell to his knees beside her bed. "I'm here, baby girl," he whispered, taking her hand with infinite gentleness. "Daddy's here, and I'm never leaving again." For 3 days they maintained vigil. Rita and Marcus took turns sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, but George never left. He slept sitting up beside Maya's bed, holding her hand, talking to her unconscious form about everything he had missed and everything he hoped they might share. "I know I don't deserve to be here," he told Maya's sleeping face. "But I love you, sweetheart. I've loved you every single day since you were born. Please come back to us. Please give me the chance to prove that you matter more than my fear." Rita watched George's devotion with growing recognition. This wasn't the terrified boy who had fled the hospital years ago. This was a man who had learned what love actually required. Marcus saw it too. The way George held Maya's hand like she was precious beyond measure, the way he had become a constant presence who could be counted on absolutely. On Thursday morning, as weak sunlight filtered through the ICU windows, Maya's eyes began to flutter open. The first thing she saw was George's face, haggard from sleepless days, but radiating relief and love. "Don't try to talk yet," George said softly, reaching for ice chips. "You're in the hospital, sweetheart. You were in an accident, but you're going to be okay." Maya's eyes moved around the room, taking in the machines, then focusing on the faces gathered around her bed. Rita was there, crying with relief. Marcus was there, gripping the bed rail. And George was there, holding her hand like he would never. "Let go, Dad," Maya whispered, the word barely audible but clear enough to stop everyone's breathing. George's face crumpled with emotion. For decades, he had dreamed of hearing that word from his children's lips. For decades, he had believed he would never deserve to hear it. "I'm here, baby girl," he sobbed, bringing her hand to his lips. "I'm here, and I'm never leaving again. I promise you, Maya." Maya's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of recognition, of acceptance, of a daughter finally claiming her father. "I love you, Dad," she whispered, and the words healed something in George that he hadn't even known was broken. Rita was crying now, watching her daughter and the man she had once loved rebuild a relationship that should have been built years ago. Marcus moved to the other side of Maya's bed and took her free hand. "We're all here," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of us, together." Maya looked around at her family, imperfect, scarred but finally whole, and smiled despite her pain. "Together," she repeated, and then, with effort, she reached for Rita and George's hands and brought them together. All of us, in that hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and the smell of antiseptic, a family that had been broken decades ago finally became complete. Not through grand gestures or perfect words, but through the simple, powerful act of choosing to stay, to fight, to love, despite the wounds they had all carried. George squeezed Rita's hand and Maya's hand and looked at Marcus through tears of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered to all of them. "Thank you for letting me come home." Maya squeezed all their hands together and whispered the words that healed every broken heart in the room. "Welcome home, Dad." Outside, Chicago continued its life. People going to work, children walking to school, families making ordinary memories. But inside room 314 of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, 4 people who had been strangers to each other for years were finally learning what it meant to be a family. Love had won. Finally, completely, beautifully, love had won.